And we're live. Welcome to The George Show. On this episode, we have a very special guest, Richard Garriott, the man himself who went to space, who created Ultima, and who has a new project on the horizon. Richard, please say
Hey, very
hi.
good to be here. Thank you.
That's awesome. Guys, Richard is a personal favorite of mine. I've played Ultima from 3.4.5 and onwards, and we are also in partnership with Stratics going to cover this interview on the website, stratics.com, so be sure to check that out to get more. Richard, please tell the fans a little bit about yourself. We haven't seen or heard from you for a little while. What is Richard up to today?
Very good. Well, as you noted, I feel like I've had multiple lives in multiple industries, frankly. Starting with my first company, Origin, and the first big product line, Ultima, of course, which I think I'm still best known for. But then after that, after the success of Ultima Online, we went off and did a company which was really Destination Games, which became part of NCSoft to do nothing but massively multiplayer games. And now I'm on my third incarnation with a company called Portalarium, with the same co-founders that I worked with at Origin and at Portalarium, and at Destination Games. We've all come back together again to hopefully reinvent yet again role-playing in this new medium of mobile and social gaming.
So you've brought the band back together.
Exactly right.
That's amazing. Richard, we're going to do 3 parts. This interview is part 1, and we're going to cover a little bit about you, and we're going to cover all about Portalarium and about Ultimate Collector, your latest project.
Great. Fantastic.
In part 2, which will air tomorrow, we're going to cover Ultimate RPG, also known as New Britannia, perhaps. It's the new RPG that will be coming out after Ultimate Collector. And then,
Exactly.
and then in part 3, we're going to talk about space and your experience with the space, with the trip to space that you had, and share a little bit what it's like to take a trip to the stars.
Perfect.
All right, guys, let's begin with Ultimate Collector. Richard, you mentioned you have your new company, Portalarium, as well as the new project. But before you built Ultimate Collector, you built some poker and blackjack gambling games.
Yeah.
Tell us what Richard is doing building casino games.
Sure. It's really funny because it's not uncommon at all for me to have to what I call defend our strategy, or at least explain it, since most people wouldn't expect Lord British to be working on casino titles.
Right.
But I think what's important about this new era is that while when you build a company from scratch, if your goal is to therefore go build a large, massively multiplayer style role-playing game with, that's what I'll call very feature-rich, that often means you're going to take a lot of time and spend a lot of money doing that. And especially when you're changing formats so radically, there's some learning that you really want to go through. You want to run a few experiments, what I'll call smaller experiments along the way, as opposed to taking it all in one shot. And so what we did is when we started Portalarium, we said, okay, we know for a fact we're going to want client server backends of code. We're going to want a billing system. We're going to want both synchronous and asynchronous gameplay. And so we thought, okay, well, what's the easiest way we can bring all that online, test it, and hopefully make a little money, monetize it a little bit, while we get the company off the ground. And that's why we chose the casino titles. So we knew from a game design perspective, we of course weren't going to shake the world up, but it's an area that's perennially in the top 5 of all games on mobile and social mediums. And we also thought that we could clearly do it better than most everybody's doing it already. So it allowed us to build our back-end infrastructure while still doing a better game than we think others are doing at that time, but build that. That was sort of part 1 for us. But that was only a stepping stone to Ultimate Collector, which is only a stepping stone to the Ultimate role-playing game, which we'll talk about for the next episode. And in the case of Ultimate Collector, we said, okay, we want to create our first original title. We wanted to create a game that was targeted right at the sweet spot of the evolving player base, which probably deserves a little bit of a description too, in what I mean by the evolving player base. I find it very interesting to study what I would call this third opportunity I have to reinvent gaming comes along with what I consider the third grand era of gamers and games. Starting with solo player games, and of course all players played solo player games when that was the only option. Then with massively multiplayer games, which grew the market really tenfold. So 10 times more people, new players, came in with MMOs. And now with social and mobile, it's again almost 10 times bigger yet again. So there's a bunch of new players that have joined the gaming industry. And so with Ultimate Collector, we wanted to help shepherd them in to a deeper, richer, better future of gaming, but not scare them off, so to speak, with by going too far ahead of where they were on their learning curve. And that's why we really picked Ultimate Collector, as we thought it was a good original title. It was not Me Too like a lot of the other copycats that are copying each other in mobile and social these days, but would hopefully lead the these new players into a deeper, richer experience that will eventually, hopefully, bring them all the way across with Ultimate Role-Playing Game.
Ultimate Collector, I had a chance to play it. It's still in beta, but everyone is able to play it if they want to try it out. Is that right?
Right now, the beta is open, but we're throttling it up and down. We occasionally close it also as we scale up and find weak points in our server architecture. So hopefully it'll remain basically open indefinitely now. But hypothetically, you might come onto a screen that says it's temporarily closed. But even if that happens, you just go to the beta sign up page, and when it opens up again, it'll email you.
Perfect. Like my point was, it felt a little bit like The Sims, where I got to do whatever I wanted to, visit whosever house I wanted to visit, and it felt like I really was playing a version of The Sims, but with a very unique and different purpose, which is collecting, getting cool stuff into your house. And I know you yourself are a very avid collector, and I imagine that must have been a big influence in deciding which kind of game to do.
Well, it's funny. We were of course brainstorming at the office what our first original title would be, and it was actually Brandon Cotton, one of our long-term, actually founding members of the team, who originally proposed we originally had an in-house name for it called Garage Sale. And when he mentioned it as this basically buying and selling and collecting and displaying and trading game, it was one that I personally latched onto immediately, because I actually look at it in the following way. When I play the game, I actually think it's sort of like an RPG light, in some sense of the word, in the sense of, as you mentioned, you have an avatar, you have a house, you can travel visit other people's houses, shops and auction houses and other places to go find things to buy and sell and trade. And as a person who, myself, I actually think that my real world travels, whether it's to space or the deep sea, and the things I bring back as collections and collectibles from those journeys, or from the science that I enjoy studying, or from the rest of the world that I enjoy exploring, I think collecting is a very enriching activity. It's not just blind repetition for leveling up. It actually is something that as you go through, if you as me, if you become a collector, I don't know what you personally collect outside of the virtual world, but most people do collect something. But whatever it is that most people collect, you sort of become an expert on that subject just by virtue of buying it, selling it, and trading it, and enjoying it. And so I felt it was a game that we could really give an honest layer of depth that was befitting our development team and our development sensibilities to create a truly enriching experience through a collecting game.
That makes perfect sense. And even MMOs, you mentioned how they grew 10 times the player base for that genre of game. I'm assuming it's because it was such a social experience where you weren't just playing by yourself and bragging to your 5 friends what sort of awesomeness you just found, but you actually had thousands of people that could share in that achievement through public leaderboards, through world chat. And that is a form of collecting. You're collecting some gear that's going to make your character look awesome. Sadly, right. It's just recycled, and the next level it's obsolete, and you need to go find your next best gear. But collecting is certainly part of those MMOs. And games like Star Wars Galaxies, for me personally, were a lot more interesting because you could put a house into the middle of the world and it was there for everyone to see, and you could put stuff into your house and invite people to your house. I love that aspect of the game, and having a game just focused on that. How much of that game would you say is going to be in Ultimate RPG?
What's interesting is, you obviously what I'll call get it at a deep level, in the sense of a lot of the technology that we're building in Ultimate Collector will migrate directly into the RPG game. However, of course, none of the art. Ultimate Collector is really a cartoon style, experience, which the RPG game will not be. And the RPG game will have a different, what I'll call, map structure. We're actually still refining exactly how continuous or segmented the world map will be in the next game, and that's not yet settled. But the point is, it won't be just teleport from person's house to person's house to person's house. It'll be more of a virtual world game.
Traveling, right?
Exactly. And so, however, the things we're refining here with Ultimate RPG that I think is so compelling. Well, in fact, let me back up even a slight step from there. If you look at the business model and the reach of solo player games, to play a solo player game, you basically had to drive to a store and pay $50 up front. Mm-hmm. And then play by yourself at home alone. Still, millions of people did it, per top-selling game.
Right.
Well, then with MMOs, you still had to drive to the retail store, pay $50 in advance, generally choose to subscribe in advance for $15 a month or so. But the fact that you were playing with other real people was so much more compelling that the market grew 10 times bigger in spite of the dramatically higher barrier to entry, more cost, and more time. You generally have to play in an MMO. You have to play for an hour to 4 hours before you really know if you're going to like it, because It usually takes that long to create a character and get on your, all your stuff together and go out on one cycle of missions. Well, one of the great magics about this new era that, it's funny, when we were starting Portalarium, there were still tons of hardcore gamers and developers who were kind of poo-pooing the social media and mobile era as games that are too light for them to either create or want to play. But what they all missed, and I like to believe that we were one of the early people to kind of jump on this and come across from what I call the old guard of experienced developers, is that what's really powerful about this new era is that you don't have to go pay $50 in advance. You can usually get it for either free or an app, minor app purchase online.
Right.
There's no subscription fee, generally speaking, up front. And the people that you're playing with, because of the new both synchronous and asynchronous play, you don't have to play only with the MMO type people who are equally devoted to getting off work at 5 o'clock, rushing home, and then playing for 6 hours so that you all stay in the leveling curve together. But rather, you can play asynchronously with the people who are on your friends graph, your real world friends that you may or may not be able to see in real time 6 hours a day, but you still want to share these experiences with asynchronously. And so for developers who respect the friends graph, respect the asynchronous need, provide compelling synchronous gameplay, and then push people, even these new players, give them high quality user interface, give them a reason to be in these virtual worlds, beyond repetitive behavior. And I'm a big believer in creating what I'll call a fair handshake from a monetization standpoint, as opposed to arbitrary monetization that tricks people into paying periodically. I'm a big believer in let people play to get a taste of it on their own early for little or no cost, but then find a mutually agreeable way to pay over time to support the existence of the game. And one other thing I forgot to mention in there too is just making a free-to-play MMO, I believe, would fail. In fact, a lot of them have failed. Mm-hmm. Because a classic MMO, still takes 1 to 4 hours even to know if it's any good. And there's tons of free-to-play, very nice visual-looking games flooding into the world market, often from Asia. They are beautiful, they are full-featured, but they're all the same. And once you've done 3 or 4 of those for free, you're going, it's just not worth my time, even for free, to try it. And so another thing that I think this new era demands of game developers is since if I paid $50, I'm going to play it long enough to find out if I like it. If I paid 0 to close to 0, you better tell me right away why this game is for me, and I better be convinced quickly. And so, but if you do all that, if you build that wrapper, I believe we can create in this new casual and mobile era games that are very compelling for both traditional gamers who will appreciate the ease of access that these up now provide, as well as these new gamers, this 10 times bigger pool of new gamers who are now flooding in and learning the great value that all the rest of us have known for a decade or two now.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, as you said, the barrier to entry is really low, but the challenge is because it's very low, there are millions of games out there that you could play on Facebook. So you have even a greater challenge to make a very good first impression.
Right.
That's amazing. I mean, for me, I personally do not play Facebook games only because they haven't reached the level that interests me. I mean, I've tried Farmville, I've tried some of the Zynga games, and it's cool to see my friends at the bottom there and building their kitchen. But when I got into Ultimate Collector, again, I saw my friends at the bottom, but I could do something that I felt was meaningful, which is actually find stuff that I found cool, not just, hey, I need to level up to the next recipe to be able to cook something that gives me more points, but to actually get that bookshelf that looks really nice, or put something into my house, that a rug that really caught my interest. I mean, that is so much more compelling. So well done, Richard. You got
Thank
me.
you. All right, excellent. Well, it's really funny too. I have even for myself, I have a similar story. There's actually very few games that I will call either social media games like Facebook or web games just through a browser or other services that honestly that I enjoy at all myself. And for me, a real turning point came not even so much on a browser, but on mobile. Obviously smartphones have existed forever, and but before the iPhone, before a touch screen, most of the games that you would try to play, like even playing that game Snake, where you try to drive around and not eat your tail, it
Right.
was a real hassle. Or Frogger, or even these simple arcade games, the user interface, the machines were just not capable of providing enough power and user interface to make games fun on those little mobile devices. And for me, it was actually a game called Spider. There was a game where you have a little spider that crawls around and makes webs to catch moths and eat them. It was an iPhone game. It was the first time I went, this is finally going to work. We're finally now going to let mobile devices, and in my mind, I back-turned that into web and social games too. I said, I've now become a believer that we're going to be able to succeed at crafting truly quality entertainment in this new era. And that's when I kind of switched tracks and said, okay, this is where I want to go build my games next.
Right. And just that element of having your friends appear magically. A friend of mine who's an elementary school teacher, Michael Mack, and Mike, if you're watching this, hello. His main point was when he created lesson plans for his kids, his students, he would just rewrite everywhere where it said the name of some Jack and Jill went up the hill. He would put the names of the people in the class. And that simple little change made every student want to do the lesson 10 times more, because they could relate. They could see their friend Sarah across the desk and read about her in this lesson, even though it was fake. If Sarah went to 7-Eleven, all of a sudden they were much more interested in reading the rest of the exercise. So by putting your friends that you already have, that Facebook just gives you for free because of the social graph, you get that instant, I'm much more interested in this game now because I know who I could be playing with.
Yeah, I agree. And how I even would relate that again into the world of collecting is that, if you go walk up to a random person and say, are you a collector? Most people would actually, their immediate response would be no, that,
No,
I'm not really a collector. But if you then press people, like, my wife, is a case study of, she says, oh, no, I'm not a collector. And so even as we were working on this game originally, when we first were kicking it off, she was like, she didn't get it necessarily, and she didn't think of herself as a collector. But you walk around the house and you go like, okay, well, that's strange because, over here you've got a whole bunch of these things on display on a shelf that were she calls tombstones of her professional career, where she helped close deals, and they gave each other these little awards for every deal they would close. And I'm going like, look, oh, you in fact are. You're collecting these little moments of your own history. You're marking the passage of time in your life, both professionally and personally, with things you've got on a shelf. And so, and then after I explored even further, she went, oh yeah, not only that, but in fact, I was a stamp collector, because my dad, used to always thought that was cool. And when she grew up in Europe, and she used to collect those to really, again, really understand and explore the history and the cultures of Europe. And so I'm going like, see, even you, my skeptical wife, are in fact a collector. And so, and then once we started writing the quests, she became a convert. So my wife is now a very active player, and in fact, she's even contributed to some of the quest lines once she realized, the power of these. And for example, let me give a taste of my belief about story arcs. Is well illustrated by the following. Since we're doing a game about collecting real things, it's no fun to collect a coiled metal spring toy. It needs to be called a slinky. Okay, because it is, and so we needed to have business partners who sold slinkies so that we could have legal access to the word slinky. And so, for example, we have partnerships with, for example, Macy's, and we are also an Amazon.com registered reseller. And so when you're collecting a slinky, if you do, you can actually click on a link that takes you to Amazon.com, and you can buy a slinky if you wish, and therefore we're covered. But in addition to that, if we were when we said we're interested in partnering with Macy's, I said it's not good enough to include Macy's just because they're willing to partner with us and give us some legal coverage.
Right.
If we're going to include Macy's, we can and should only do it because because Macy's has a compelling story which can be involved in the game. And so, given that challenge, I then sat back and said, okay, well, what is cool about Macy's? And if I were to ask you, what is Macy's well known for, you might think of, for example, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Are you familiar with that?
Actually, I'm not, but I have heard of it.
Are you familiar with Thanksgiving Day Parade? Are you
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, as it turns out, that doing a little research about Macy's, it turns out that 100 some odd years ago, or somewhere near 100 years ago, the original holiday for Thanksgiving used to have a date that fluctuated closer to Christmas and farther away from Christmas, sort of like Easter fluctuates.
Right.
And that was very bad for retailers, because there wasn't a fixed amount of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas for selling products during the peak season of selling products.
Okay.
And it was Mr. Macy of Macy's who lobbied the President of the United States to fix the date of Thanksgiving on the third Thursday of November, so there would be a predictable amount of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So Black Friday, the big retail selling day, is all because of Macy's. And
Wow.
And that's why they throw the big Thanksgiving Day Parade, is because it's central to them. And so, because they are the ones who gave us Thanksgiving on a fixed date and Black Friday from a retailing standpoint. So that's a story you discover as you explore Macy's in our game.
That's fantastic. I love these little Easter eggs, these hidden gems that very few people know, but once you learn them, it just like ding, wow, great,
Right.
great little story.
Yeah, and we try to do that throughout every object that's in the game. Truly everything that we put into the game, we try to make sure had that similar level of story.
Is the goal also to provide a real way to buy these products? You mentioned you can buy the Slinky because you want it to be legally covered, but do you also take that a step further and say every object in the game, if you like it, you can click here to buy it?
Interestingly, you've unearthed the same thing we unearthed, which is that was not our original intention.
Right.
However, it very quickly became obvious that, in fact, when you do collect things, you are re-motivated to engage them in the real world.
Right.
And in fact, even as we were creating the game, we became examples of this ourselves. So, for example, when I was doing research for the original Toy Quests, I was going through things like the Sears Christmas wish books back from the early 1900s to look at really old toys. And I would see things like going, oh yeah, I remember that from when I was a child, but I haven't seen one in a million years. And then I would literally go, but it was, or I would see things I'd never seen before, but I thought were cool. Like one thing I saw was, we've all seen these like kiddie phones that have a wire between them, so kids could put one phone in one room and call the phone in the other room with a hard connection.
Right.
But they actually made one with an operator panel in the middle to where you could reconnect the wires and actually do distribution to a number of phones.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's really cool. I've never seen one, so I looked it up on eBay and bought one, and it's on display now in our office as part of our Ultimate Collector kind of display. And that's only one example of really quite a few that I can give about where even I was motivated to go re-buy things that I remember from my childhood because of playing Ultimate Collector or creating Ultimate Collector.
Right.
And so what's interesting is that to close the loop, we actually have gone, and for anything that is contemporary, anything that's a contemporary product, we actually do take you directly to the place you can buy that, whether or not they're a partner of ours. And what's interesting also is that for a lot of those companies, key ones being Macy's and Amazon for this particular case, it's actually easier for us to connect as a reseller of their product than just a marketeer of their product. And what that means is that if you actually go to Macy's or Sears and buy one of those things, we actually get a little bit of money. And so we actually make money on people going to buy those things in real world. But that, again, that was we don't expect to make a killing on that area, of course. But it is interesting that it is technically it's a little side business.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, the virtual world is something a lot of us complain about and say, hey, kids, stop playing games. Go out there and get the real sunshine, not the, game-generated sunshine. But, I mean, for me, growing up, I felt games were a very important part of social development because games are social now, at least the MMOs, I felt that I learned a lot of that interaction. And I mean, it's safer online. Like when you're at school, you get the bullies and you get people and you get rejection. But when it's in a virtual world, it feels okay to be rejected. And you even end up playing across the age barriers. Like I found like back when I was 25 and I was playing EverQuest, I would be playing with a 13-year-old for hours and I wouldn't even know he's 13 until we just got to know each other a little bit and started chatting about who we are in real life. And it's like, wow, you're a 13-year-old. I can't ever imagine playing with a 13-year-old and having fun
right.
in real life. So I imagine this is also an element of Ultimate Collector and ultimately Ultimate RPG is that bridging the age gap, bridging the social gap, and giving people something real to learn, to take away so that when they do finish playing the game, they've actually learned something in real life.
I completely agree. And that's also specifically why we're developing a pair of features that are in Ultimate Collector, and of course we'll carry it forward, which is the use of both synchronous and asynchronous interactions. And in particular, the asynchronous tools are really there to help you with real-world friends who are likely not online at the exact same time you are. I mean, most people in their tribal friends group statistically have somewhere around 120 people. I mean, that's research has been done to show that's the average size of, even if you go back through human evolution, that's the size of a tribe before it kind of splits up and forms two independent tribes.
120?
How about 120? I think I'm within plus or minus 10 of the right number there.
Interesting. I had not heard that number. Good to know.
And if you also look at people's Facebook friends graph, it's about that same number. And so that is just a natural tendency of the number of people you can kind of stay connected with and keep up with and have a meaningful experience. But so if you have 120 friends, the probability if you log on for 15 minutes at a time, say 3 to 5 times a day, you're not going to very often run into one of those same people identically online at the same time, playing the identical game in the identical, what I'll call map area. And so it's really important to have asynchronous features to support the often missed opportunities of you being online at the same time as your real friends.
Right.
That being said, one of the great things about the MMO era was all the emergent interaction. All the things that you walk through the streets of the bazaar of the center of a town and you watch people out there forging swords and people coming in to buy them and people running out and the dragon coming in and eating a few around the outskirts and people stealing from each other, whatever it might be. You need to have the richness of the tapestry of that real world there also. But what's interesting is there's really still very few game makers in the new era that are trying to do both of these concurrently. For example, if you look at most of the Vil games and the clones of those games, They do great asynchronous work, but almost never do anything synchronous. And not only do they not do anything synchronous, those games are usually siloed. And what I mean by that is that, let's suppose we're friends, but you're playing in a farming game and I'm playing in a cafe game. We have really no interaction with each other at all, of course.
Right.
But one of the things that I'm a big believer of, and this is kind of tipping to the discussion of the RPG side, but I'm still a big believer that Ultima Online is relatively unique compared to other MMOs. Most MMOs, every player is largely a combatant, or first and foremost a combatant, and you might have some crafting or other skills on the side, but everyone's involved in combat.
Right.
Whereas Ultima Online in particular, half the people were involved primarily in combat, but there was another 30 to 50% of the players that effectively never participated in combat. And what they did instead is they were farmers, or bakers, or pet handlers, or blacksmiths, and other roles, these other roles. Well, if you look at those other roles, those are the things that have become popular in social media, farming and cafes, etc. But as opposed to being siloed, if you like to run a cafe or if you like to farm, why is it not that why can't my chef in my cafe wander over to your farm or farm stand and buy from you if you're online, or
Right.
buy from the NPC running your farm stand if you're offline, and vice versa? Why can't those things be reintegrated? And so I think it's interesting to note that the games that these new players that have come into social media, they're already playing the things that are basically Ultima Online dissected. And so if there's anybody who I think is best, any team that is best suited to reintegrate now the people who like farming and cafes and with the people who like to play role-playing and go out and fight monsters and collect treasure, I think our team is as well suited as you can imagine to re-envision role-playing games in the future.
What a fantastic goal, and I completely agree with you. The only game I can think of is, again, Star Wars Galaxies, that let you plop a house down in the middle of the game. They also let you pursue career paths as a dancer, as a medic, and you didn't ever have to go out fighting into the world. You could just play as that role. And if
Right.
you can reinvent that in a social game where it, again, has that meaningful experience, I thought that's what really set SWG apart, Star Wars Galaxies, and I've never seen it in another game, at least not with that much focus. As you said, there's some crafting and other little
Yep.
things that they throw in just because everyone else is doing it. But you actually put it in as a first-class citizen into the game design so that it makes it more meaningful and not just something else you could do when you're tired of combat.
And that again goes back to why Ultimate Collector, I think, is a very powerful middle step in the journey to the ultimate role-playing game, is because it allows us to begin to what we'll call this, to do this reintegration. I look at the Ultimate Collector as a kind of an RPG light in a sense, because I think when we finally do the role playing game, what we can't do is start you into a game where you take an hour to figure out if I want to be a farmer or a cafe person or
Right.
or an adventurer. That won't work because people want to know what they're getting into. You've got really 2 minutes, 5 minutes at most, to let you find the part of the game, the part of experience that really suits you.
Mm-hmm.
And so how exactly we funnel people into that is something we're still working on, whether it's an Ultima 4 style gypsy test that tosses you in one place or another, will still to be determined. But this is why what we're learning with Ultimate Collector is how to, Ultimate Collector already has, if you want to be a collector and that is your primary motivation, like it is mine, the game supports that very deeply. If you want to become a reseller and flip stuff and maximize your profits, the game supports that very deeply. But if you really like, you want to take your home and your yard and your interiors and play a more Sims-like experience to create a play space that you think is glorious by whatever terms you think, we support that very deeply. And so we already have a game that really has 3 facets, which is a lot more than most of these mobile and social games do.
Richard, may I
yeah.
suggest a 4th?
Yeah, please.
I'll start with just a short history because this is, again, a very personal story for me. And I met my wife through a website. And it wasn't like Match.com or a dating website. I did try those, and we met some great women, but none of them, we never found that chemistry. There was a website called studypond.com. Studypond.com matches people who want to learn a foreign language. In my case, I wanted to learn some Chinese.
Yep.
With people who want to teach it and maybe learn English or the other language in exchange. So it was a matchmaking service based on interests, languages in this case.
Exactly.
And for me, I was on a trip to go promote Asian singers and songwriters outside of Asia. That was my next big business idea. And I wanted to be able to go to Taiwan and be able to say more than just ni hao, or at least to be able to intone it properly. Mm-hmm. So my point is, I was looking for a common interest, and I found Xiao Yu, my wife, and we just did lessons for 3 months. When I went to Taiwan, it was a great business experience. She was there too, and we went to the meetings together, and we built a relationship. My point is that I wasn't looking for love, and it found me, or I found it. We just stumbled upon it.
Yep.
All because of StudyPond. So my suggestion, would be, why not incorporate a matchmaking service as well, where you have common interests, you've discovered you both like to collect these things, or you both like to be cooks or bakers in Ultimate RPG when that comes out. Why not incorporate a way for people to, in a roundabout way, discover feelings for each other, starting from common interests?
I would completely agree. In fact, even for Ultimate Collector, we have on we didn't make it into what I'll call the original launch feature list.
Right.
But we already have tools, data mining on the backside, to do things like, say, to notice what things you like to collect. I mean, we're doing it at a number of levels. For example, usually if you say, like, you may find this strange, but I like to collect Barbies. I'm a Barbie collector. and the reason why I'm a Barbie collector is they make a Barbie for every job that exists, every place on the earth you can explore, every adventure sport you can go do. And so Barbies make a cool way to kind of, just like any other collectible or collection I have, showcase your history in a sense with these dolls. And so, but most people who collect something in the physical real world will, by the way, do similar things online. Right. And so we can, first of all, do things like scan people's Facebook data, and we'll know if they think Barbies are cool, and so we can drive them to Barbies in-game, for example, or we can make them manifest. We haven't done that yet, but that's one of our long-term aspirations. And similarly, we want to make sure that once we know that you're into Barbies, that we will introduce you to other players who you might not know yet who have similar interests. And so that begins to touch on what you're saying. But I think what's interesting about the sociological aspects of this era is that, if you go back in time 100 years, most people's physical next door neighbor were people who worked at the same neighboring farm or factory together. Right. And so they had good reason to have shared interest beyond the fact that they were just neighbors. Mm-hmm. But in the modern commuting society, most people, their physical next door neighbor doesn't work at the same place. Right. Most people, their physical neighbors, frankly, they don't even know who they are. And even if they've been introduced and know each other by name, you don't generally go out on dinner parties and such with your physical next door neighbor. They're just not the person you have these kind of shared interests with anymore.
Right.
And one of the very powerful aspects of the virtual world is that it immediately means that you have a shared interest with the people who are in that same virtual space with you, because you've already self-sorted to that commonality. Right. And as you know, in the MMO era, people have worked very hard to find each other in the real world once they've found that powerful shared experience, right. Even when they've often been so very, very far apart in the real world. I mean, one of the things you were really lucky about is you not only found each other through the shared experience, but you actually had an opportunity to spend physical time together to grow and blossom.
Exactly.
And we haven't yet decided how exactly to address that issue, but we already know that we want to introduce people who have as close a matched interest as possible, really because we just think we want to respect and embellish the friends graph, because we think that's what's powerful about this new era.
Well, my suggestion would be simply, again, this was a personal experience, speed dating. I know it's one of those things that people all say, well, come on, what's speed dating? But it really is the best way to get to know someone in person for 5 minutes that you may or may not connect with. And usually that's all it takes to get that good, strong first impression with someone. And games, like you have quests, missions to go on. Why not include one where you'd say, if you identify yourself as single and looking, create a mission where you would have
Which
a
we
date.
can pull out of your Facebook profile. So yeah.
Exactly. So create almost like a similar to a Match.com experience where you choose which attributes you want to publicize in your house or on some public forum, and people can look through and say, this person looks interesting. She studied Chinese, and she is in Asia, and she likes the color blue. So
Right.
do I.
Right.
And then make a proposal. Would you like to go on a speed date with me? And if she accepts, then you have a mission to
Yep.
meet each other at a particular cafe at a particular time,
Sure.
and just have a chat.
Absolutely. Well, I will take your input, and we will noodle on it and see what we can manifest for you.
Okay, no, of course, it's just
Yeah.
a random thought.
But I agree with it. We're in complete agreement.
Matchmaking is a very important service. I mean, it's the art
Yeah.
of solving loneliness, and I
Right.
think loneliness is one of the big problems in today's world. That
I agree.
you just need to find some soulmate, some
Right.
person that really you understand because they help you up. I mean, we have friends and family for that, but you can never have too many friends, and you never know who you may meet. And having tools or a platform to facilitate those connections, I think would be so meaningful, so wonderful for the world.
I agree, and that's one of the great powers of the new medium is that we can do it.
All right, Richard, before we end part one of this interview, is there anything else you wanted to share with the viewers about Ultimate Collector or about yourself?
Well, no, I would just say to wrap up that I hope people get a chance to go check it out. Right now, it's running on Facebook, but will be shortly right behind it. It will be on browser, directly available on browsers as well as on mobile devices. So please come check it out. And even if you are, like a lot of hardcore gamers, have been skeptical that the future in web and mobile will provide games that are of the level of quality and depth and enriching experience that you've grown to be accustomed to, please at least come check out Ultimate Collector. I think we've done a pretty good job of proving that the future is also here for you.
Absolutely. And guys, the link is in the description below to the Ultimate Collector. Click that beneath this video and visit Stratics.com, where you can get the full interview in text as well as additional notes. That's also in the link below. Richard, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you. Stick around for part two, airing tomorrow.
My pleasure.
All right, guys. This video is part of the Way movement, a career path in video sponsored by TGN. To learn more, visit tgn.tv.